Hello and welcome to our news. This year in 2024 is the 30th anniversary of the death of Zino Davidoff. So I thought it would be a good idea to go back to his biography, find some information, make this video to find out, especially for the younger people, who he was and what he did for the cigar industry, and particularly for the Cuban cigar industry. So I dug all the books I could find on Zino Davidoff, the newspaper articles as well. So this is the only biography that was made about Zino Davidoff, the man with the cigar, written by Dieter Wirtz. It's in German and in French. Couldn't find it in English. I don't know if it's been translated. If it has not been translated, someone will have to do it. And then there are two books that were written by Zino Davidoff. This one, which is the book of the cigar connoisseur. Here it is. It was published in 1967, before I was born. And there was another book called The History of the Habano, L'Histoire du Havane, in French, of course. Zino Davidoff spoke French, Spanish, Russian, probably, maybe Yiddish. This I don't know, I couldn't find it, but and English, of course. So this book here, as you can see, was signed by the man himself. So what do we know about Zino Davidoff? He was born in 1906 near Kiev in Russia. At that time, Russia was an empire. And the particularity of his family is they were Jewish, and the Jews at that time lived in villages, and they were suffering a lot of pogroms. And what pogroms are, usually there were people coming, stealing, beating them up. And his father was obviously fed up with this, and they decided to leave Russia. And they left Russia in 1911. And he was only 5 years old because he was born, as I said, in 1906. And they moved to Geneva. Some people say they were on their way to the US, going west, and that they stayed in Geneva maybe to make a bit of money making cigarettes. His father had a tobacco shop near Kiev, and the family knew how to make what we call now Russian cigarettes. So they stopped in Geneva, opened the shop, and Zino went to school. Then remember that in 1917 started the Russian Civil War, and it lasted until 1923, where the Tsar, the Emperor of Russia, was assassinated with his family, and they were the pro-empire and the communist, and the country became a communist country after the revolution. So, country that Davidoff left a few years later did not exist anymore as such. And in 1925, Zino is 19, and his father, still in Geneva, decides to send him to Latin America on a trip. In those days, since the Middle Age, a lot of families used to send their sons away to learn jobs, to get experience of the world. I mean, at that time, you couldn't fly, obviously, that far. So you had to take a boat, and he first went to Argentina. Argentina at that time was definitely the best country in Latin America that you could visit. It was very high, and it was very well developed. It was a very rich country. And so Zino went to Argentina in 1925, and it is important because he said that he was holding what we call a Nansen passport, and it's a passport for stateless people that you could get in Switzerland at the uh, because he couldn't get a Russian passport, and he was not Swiss at that time, so he was traveling on paper. They still exist, those passports for people who have no country. I met some people like that who had been white people that had been thrown out of Zimbabwe, and they showed me that they had a stateless passport that was given by the United Nations for people who had no country anymore. Interesting. So he goes to Latin America, ends up in Brazil, of course, studying tobacco and probably enjoying the life. It's after it's a sort of study trip. And then in Brazil, I read that in one of the books, he meets a farmer that tells him that for him the best tobacco he could find was in Cuba. So he decides to go to Cuba in 1928, and he stays in Cuba until 1930. So he stays around more or less a year and a half to 2 years. Then decides to go back to Geneva. He learned a lot about tobacco. I guess the guy spent 5 years in Latin America in tobacco fields, so I guess he knows about tobacco. And he goes to Geneva in 1930, meets a lady, gets married in 1931, and in 1933 has a daughter. He's only kid. He will never have another kid. And he buys a tobacco shop that he runs with his wife in 1931 after he gets married. And he installs there what is supposed to be the first ever walk-in humidor. He understands the importance of humidity to keep the flavor and the quality of the cigars. So apparently the first walk-in humidor is not in Geneva, but it's in Lausanne. Lausanne is about an hour drive, 45 minutes to an hour on the lake. You can check. Lausanne is also where the head office of the Olympics are. It's a beautiful city with a hill. It's not like Geneva where it's flat, and it's a different canton. It's not the canton of Geneva. It's canton of Vaud, VAUD. So in 1936, he decides to go back to Geneva and take over the Geneva shop that his father had opened. And he goes there with his wife Sonia and starts doing his business, selling cigars. At that time in Switzerland, a major importer of cigars was the company called Dur, Durr, which still exists now and is owned by the Oettinger Group, which now owns Davidoff. And the company was created in 1876, company Dur. So they were importing cigars. It's important later on in the story. And so he sells cigars. And in 1940, as you remember, maybe not the youngest one, the World War II started in 1939, and the French got attacked. They lost, and the German army were entering France in 1940. And as the Germans were nearing Paris, the boss of CETA, which is a state monopoly of tobacco in France, which still exists, contacted Mr. Davidoff in his shop in Geneva by phone and said, "We have an issue. The Germans are arriving. We just received 2 million Cuban cigars. they're waiting in a warehouse to be to enter to be cleared by customs. They have not cleared the French customs yet, and we are afraid that the Germans will be here in a few days, and we have the feeling that they might not pay for them and they're going to smoke them. So, would you like those 2 million sticks of Cuban cigars? So, Davidoff said, I would love them, but I cannot pay for them. I've just um, refurbished my father's shop in Geneva, installing the humidor system. I don't have the money. So the guy said, listen, I didn't know you. I was told about you by some Cuban people. You have to remember that time it was not just one company owning everybody. It was a lot of different companies, a lot of different manufacturers, a lot of different fabricas, a lot of different brands, and someone recommended to the boss of Seita to call Mr. Davidoff because they knew Switzerland was a neutral country, and they would probably not be invaded. So that was a smart move. It was also a smart move for Davidoff because he got those 2 million sticks, arranged payments after the war. So he got those sticks that he could pay later. And during the war, as you know, it was destructive. I mean, the war was horrible, but people continued to smoke, and there was only one shop in Europe selling cigars, really. There was also some in Germany, but in a country at peace, it was Switzerland, and that's a time where Davidoff, who was actually Jewish at a time where the Jews were being decimated in the concentration camps, um, had chosen the right country to be in. Because it was safe in Geneva. And of course, a lot of people looking to buy cigars would come to Geneva because, as you know, there was Société des Nations, which came before the United Nations, still totally useless to prevent wars. That's why the Société des Nations was built. It was built to prevent further war after World War, and we've seen that, unfortunately. Guys, if you're working there, I mean, I feel sorry to tell you, but it's not working. So something is wrong, probably in the way you have sorted things out. That was just not political message, but so that was a situation at that time. So business was very well. All the diplomats used to come to Geneva and buy cigars. So Zino became world famous, and of course he knew what he was talking about. He had spent a lot of time in the field, and he was selling cigars that he was buying in Switzerland, and of course the cigars that were imported that he got from the French distributor. And so, in at the end of the war in 1946, the like in many stories, there are many sides to the stories, and nobody's alive yet to talk about it. But according to Davidoff, he was talking to a Cuban delegation that he met that came to see him after the war. They had a large stock of cigars, and they wanted to sell cigars and to make. So they asked him, if he needed something. According to the Dur company and a book I read, the Dur was here too, the family, because they were providing Davidoff with a lot of cigars to sell at that time. But we don't know who's telling the truth. It's not very important. What happened during this meeting, they were in a very nice French restaurant, and they opened a wine list, and Davidoff said that at that time he had an idea to create the Grand Cru de la Havane, and he sold the French Grand Cru there, and he said, "Why don't you make me a series of chateaux?" So it will be called the Chateau, the Chateau series. It actually became later on the Oyo de Monterey Chateau series because he liked the what Oyo de Monterey chose for him, because he had to choose the blend, he had to choose the location of the farm of the tobacco field. He had to select everything, and because obviously he went there and decided that Oyo de Monterey. At that time, you remember, it was before the revolution. So the Oyo de Monterey, a bit like a Bordeaux chateau, would have its fabrica, it would have its own fields, and it would have its own brand. So people would work and make only Oyo de Monterey cigars. So that, which is different now, because as you know, a fabrica can make different brands of cigars. So he chose to work with Oyo de Monterey. So Oyo de Monterey was the first brand to make cigars for Davidoff only. And an important point for me was that also in the so at that time, the Chateau series, the ring size of the cigars, Aubryon Lafitte was 40, Latour Margaux was 42, Icame was 42, and that was the biggest size, is 42 at that time. So when you think about the cigars people smoke nowadays, a lot of people don't consider that would not consider smoking something smaller than a 50 or so robusto size. But at that time, those very famous and really, really good cigars were either 40 or 42 ring size. It's only later that Davidoff made the Dom Perignon, which was in the 70s, but it was a 47. But before that, it was only 40 and 42 ring size. So you have to keep this in mind. Davidoff is mainly small size cigar. Never made anything over 47 in Cuba. So we have to remember that. No big fat cigars. So another point that I wanted to say is in the 50s, as he starts receiving his cigars and his own Oyo de Monterey Chateau series, he's also working on building up and developing humidors. And Davidoff is also known to be the guy who asked, thought that the box of 25 were too small. He asked for 50 caps. So that's what we have to thank him for. The humidors really invented the humidification system for cigars, and also the 50 caps. So on top of the of being a big star, and but he was very humble. I read a lot of stuff from different people and journalists, and he was a very kind man, extremely elegant, but very humble, always extremely elegant. And another thing I learned from him, he hated people who were late. He would not wait for people. For him, punctuality was very, very important. Very good sense of humor, very kind people, very seductive. Even men and women found him extremely nice, and a great charisma, great shopkeeper. I mean, the guy knew how to sell cigar, and because of his talent, because of his knowledge and hardworking, the shop in Geneva was open 7 days a week at that time, and you could only get people to work 7 days a week if they were family members. You couldn't get ordinary staff to work 7 days a week. They used to open the shop 7 days a week. So in 1959, of course, things changed with the Cuban Revolution, because instead of having different brands managing their own sales and distribution, marketing, the Cuban government, as you know, nationalized the tobacco industry. So there was only Cuba Tobacco to talk to. And in 1967, during the Cold War, still the So, as you know, there was the embargo in 1963, and the embargo on in the U.S. 1967, the representative of Cuba Tobacco came to visit Zino in Geneva, and they had a lot of stock of cigars. As you know, the embargo in the U.S. being still now the biggest market for Cubans for premium cigars. Sorry, at that time was the biggest market. So with America not buying cigars anymore, at least officially, the Cubans had a lot of stock. So they came to Zino and said, "Okay, we know that you are very good. We know that you're selling a lot of cigars. And what about instead of having Oyo de Monterrey making the brand Oyo de Monterrey making your cigars, your Chateau series, we can have your own brand, Davidoff brand. We create a new brand for you." So they agreed that first of all they would have three cigars: the Ambassadrice, and the number one and number two, which are Laguito number one and Laguito number two. And so in 1967, they agreed that those cigars would be made, and it would be made in El Laguito, which was the factory that had started to make the Cohiba in 1966. So moved out of Hoyo de Monterrey to El Laguito in 1967, and the first cigars were out in 1968, 1969. And very interesting again, the ring size of number one and number two, they were 38. Ambassadrice is a 26 cigars. Who smokes 26 ring size cigars? Not many people. It's once again a lesson to learn. And that's it. Then in 1975, all the Chateau series were made with the Davidoff label, not the Oyo de Monterrey label. In 1970, which is my year of birth, Zino Davidoff was 64 years old and decided to sell his shop to the Oettinger company, which a tobacco group in Switzerland, and to Ernst Schneider, who was a very famous, who became extremely famous because he married the daughter of the owner of Oettinger, and made it the huge multi-billion-dollar company it is now. So when Davidoff sold his company to Oettinger, it was one shop and his name. And he sold the company for 4 million Swiss francs, which at that time, he sold the shop for $1 million with a stock, $1 million in 1970. So why did Zino sell? He was 64. He had been a shopkeeper all his life, and he wanted to enjoy life, travel with his wife, and take some time. They had a nice house. They had a nice chalet, and they didn't have any time to go there. So he decided to spend the rest of his life and take some time with his wife. So you have to respect that. He kept. He was still an ambassador of the brand, so they still traveled with him. And of course, this man was a legend, and he still is now. So they traveled with him, and he still had he was still invited to the openings of shops, because what Mr. Schneider did was that he took the name and made it huge. He also bought the Zino Davidoff name, and after that, there was licenses for perfumes and humidors, etc. And so in 1975, the Chateau series moved from Oyo to the Davidoff brand name. In 1976, they launched the Meal series, which is a 1,000 series. And all of these cigars were discontinued in 1989 because they stopped making Cuban cigars. Davidoff stopped making Cuban cigars in Cuba and moved to the Dominican Republic, and they started making cigars in the Dominican Republic, I think in 1991. So why did at that time Davidoff, which had been bought for 20 years by Oettinger and was managed by um, Ernst Schneider, why did they get out of Cuba? Once again, there are two sides to the story. It's very interesting. I'm going to make a video about it. I need to talk to some people. Unfortunately, Ernst Schneider died in 2009. Because there are two sides of the story. Of course, Davidoff blames the Cuban tobacco quality, but I read an article from Cigar Aficionado about Francisco Padron, who was the man who reorganized the brands in the 80s and realized that there were 200 distributors and that they were making selling them cheap, did not handle and he did not have much control over the sales of the cigars. So he decided to reorganize the cigar, the Cuban cigar structure and and distribution system. And this is when he decided that he asked for 50% of the profits of Davidoff. And obviously Davidoff said no. So this is the story. This is one side of the story, and there's of course the Davidoff side of the story. Anyway, they decided to split, not to work together, and not selling. They are now selling Cuban cigars in Geneva. They are not Habano specialists. They're not a Habanos, a Casal Habano, or not even a Habanos Point. So they don't get all the nice boxes. But they, in Geneva, still sell Cuban cigars. Very nice shop, by the way, very, very professional. So you can see from the shop there, you can visit in Geneva. It's a very nice shop. They have accessories, liquors, and of course you see all the whiskeys, rums, etc., etc. But a very nice humidor with, of course, the Davidoff cigars and also some Habanos. Yes, of course, no more Cuban Davidoffs. You will not find them in the shops. There are still some that turn up at auctions. So, as a summary, I must say that Mr. Davidoff is a legend. He was very knowledgeable. He was an amazing salesman, great class. Another important point that not many people know is that obviously Davidoff was selling cigars, but not only, was also selling pipe tobacco, pipes, as they are today, and cigarettes. And not many people know that Davidoff was all his life still smoking cigarettes and pipes. There are still pictures of him smoking cigarettes, and of course there is a Davidoff cigarette brand. So for him, I mean, he really loved tobacco, and he was not only smoking cigars, which usually nowadays, especially for people aficionados I know, they usually smoke only cigars when they smoke Cuban cigars. They rarely smoke other things. I mean, I have some friends who do, and they do vape now, which didn't exist before, but it is quite interesting information that he was also a pipe and cigarette smoker. I recommend that you find his books. They're not easy to find anymore, but whatever it is, which is the whatever book, the Livre du Connaisseur here, or the history of the Habano. Very interesting book. And the biography from Dieter Wirtz. Very interesting, more. And there's a video also that was made, and you can find it on YouTube. I'm going to put the link of the video. It's subtitled in English. It's very, very good video. Very interesting. You see the man himself talk. You see him in his shop. He talks in Spanish. Talks in French. I can't remember if it talks in English in the video, but anyway, it's a beautiful video. So watch it. I think it's about an hour. So that's what happened. He's missed. He had a great life. He had a happy life, and something that he said that has become his motto. He used to say to his friend, "Don't let anybody choose the cigars for you. You're a honest guy. You choose your cigar yourself." And apparently used the words extraordinary and formidable a lot, with a Swiss and Russian accent like formidable. And yes, his motto was, life is simple. A little bit of work, a little psychology, and a lot of optimism. So we are going to finish this video on these great words of wisdom. I hope you know more about Zino. I hope I haven't forgotten too much. As some of you may know, I'm writing a book about my journey into cigars. So I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to talk about the issues I talked about before, and put the articles that I'm talking about, of course. I'm back from the Bolivar Regentis launch in London. I'm going to make a video. I'm back from the launch of the Diplomáticos El Emisario in Basel. I'm going to make a video about it too. So I'm very busy at the moment preparing my trip to Cuba also on 3 days. I'm going to be, of course, making a lot of videos in Cuba. So look forward to seeing you. Bye.